Hello everyone, Brian here. We're out in the permaculture slash resort garden, and if you're not familiar with this space, this is where we play with permaculture practices. And the reason it's called resort is originally this is the last resort for some of these plants with extra plants and seedlings that didn't get a spot elsewhere in the garden. They ended up here, and they kind of are kind of left here to kind of fend for themselves because there's not much time to tend to them or space to give to them. So that's why it's called the resort or last resort garden. So today we'll be planting a Fuji apple tree into our resort garden to begin uh, our food forest. And food forest is a term in permaculture. It's the idea where you have trees and underneath you have different types of canopies. Underneath the canopy you have different plants that take advantage of the microclimates that is created when you plant a tree. So you have your fruit tree on top, and down beneath you might have some shade-loving plants like kale and other things growing within proximity and in harmony with the trees to maximize the use of your space and also maximize what you can get from your space. I guess that's pretty much the same thing. So there are other fruit trees that reside in the backyard, and they still are in containers because it's taking some time for me to be comfortable with each of the locations that I want to plant the trees in. With planting trees, you can't really take them out and move them around because doing so is it's physically difficult too with the root ball and the dirt. It's really heavy, and just doing that will taking it in and out will provide will give the tree too much shock, and they will die as a result. So the best practice is to, if you have a tree in a container, once you plant it, kind of leave it there until or pretty much leave it there. So with the apple tree, they're pretty much a dime a dozen. So I can plant this Fuji apple tree with uh, less reservation. Um, and we're gonna plant it in this spot here. On the other side is the public sidewalk. And my philosophy with fruit trees and other plants, when you plant them within the reach of the public, at some point someone's gonna want to sample your fruit or your vegetables. So best not to let that bother you because that's gonna happen. Um, as far as this spot, we're gonna have to, I guess, make another terrace here, and we have a weeping fig log that we pruned off the tree earlier this year that we can probably use here. We may need to shift some stuff around, but hopefully it won't take too much work to do this morning to get this Fuji apple tree planted. There are a couple of considerations here. Ideally, I would cut this and line it up, this log here, and line it up with what's going on there, but I think I'm just gonna take the easier route today, just and do it with the log down here and underneath this one, and have it sit more vertically, so that way we can have a little bit more soil come up. So the next step is to dig this soil here to loosen it a little bit and plant our tree. Okay, I lost the audio while recording, so I'm at the computer now, just kind of narrating what happened this morning. Here we have our hole, and it's dug pretty deep, at least the depth of the pot. So what we normally do is we like to measure before we take the plant out, and it looks like we're gonna have to fill this back a little bit because with the log and the terrace created, the tree will end up being a little bit too low in the ground. So we'll take it out and we'll go and get some leaves from around the olive tree, and we'll mix it with the clay It'll help it with keeping the soil loose down there for the roots. So before planting the tree, we noticed that there's a side shoot coming out from the base of the tree, and we like the growth to happen towards the top. And this is a pretty tender growth, and I can take it off without too much worry that it'll cause a large wound to this tree. So always be careful. If you want to err on the side of caution, snip it off with some pruners. Otherwise, take caution, because at worst you can tear the bark and it'll create a larger wound on the tree where bad things can happen, like infection and all that stuff. Here we're looking at the root ball, and it's always good to break off the roots that are on the bottom. This encourages the growth to fan out, whereas if allowed to do so uninhibited, the roots will pretty much grow around itself and it'll choke the plant out over time. So always best to either cut off with a knife about an inch off the bottom, or just to break it apart with your hands. What we're also looking at here is the substrate that the plants and trees come in. And what I've noticed is that nurseries like to use fast draining substrate like peat moss and and in this case sand and sawdust. It's it's a way, I think, for them to water the plants without worry that there will be waterlog and the plants drowning. So they use these fast draining substrate and water throughout the day. But when we take it home, this is something that we have to be concerned about. If we leave them in the pots, we'll have to continue to water them a few times a day for this reason. Especially in our climate in the desert, we have to water it several times a day to keep the plants and trees happy. But one of the things I've also discovered in my experience with growing plants from pots that come in the nursery, especially with native soil, is that there's a difference in soil composition. We have here clay that we're going to be planting the tree in, and the substrate that the tree currently is in, and the substrate that's surrounding the root ball, is a fast draining substrate. So if we're planting this in the ground and we continue to water our plants and trees like we normally do with plants and trees that have been in the ground for a long time, which is either once a day or once a week, and we do that here, this tree is going to die because the water will have drained out of this fast draining substrate and die. So something to keep in mind when you purchase your plants from the nursery is to look at the substrate and see how much of a differential between what it came in and what your soil is. So if there's a large differentiation between the different types of substrates, keep that in in your calculations as to how often you water. We're gonna put our Fuji tree into the hole now. It's it's almost 9 a.m. in the morning, and it's pretty warm today, pretty warm and humid. I'm already drenched from this little bit of work. But yeah, back to the apple tree and the soil that it's grown in. While it's fashionable to add a lot of substrate, um, nice healthy soil to this uh, area, once again, we're going to do a permaculture theme practice here and go about it slowly. So to improve the soil, what we're going to do is we're going to tuck this bean plant into the ground and let that turn into organic matter that will become part of a humus layer. There's not any kind of humus here. There's just all clay. And in the apple orchards, they grow their apples in the same California clay as here. So, but we'll use permaculture practices to build up a nice, healthy soil layer, and we'll put organic material on top. We'll use the wood lice that give us so much trouble in eating our little tiny seedlings to put them to use here, and we'll throw some wood lice around here and help them establish a colony, and then we'll continue to throw um, lots of green matter for them to eat and turn into woodlice manure. Here I'm looking at some rocks that we dug up from out of the ground, And it's always a wonder to find rocks, because rocks are usually found in untouched soil. And in this area, in this urban area with homes built in the 50s, and this area being around at least 70 years old, it's always interesting to find that there's untouched earth. So the rocks that we dig up, we're definitely going to be able to use elsewhere in this um, area or the yard to help us um, shore up some spots, or just to add ornamental appeal to our growing areas. So yeah, here's the rest of the uh, part of the planting the tree, which is to backfill it. We'll backfill it halfway, water it, and backfill it some more, give it some more water, and then that's how we get our tree planted. With our Fuji apple tree planted, we've added another component to our food forest. This is a pretty good spot for it, I believe. There's morning, afternoon sun. Late day, when the sun shifts, the apple tree will be shaded by the olive tree that's behind us, which I think it's okay. Apple trees are grown in the higher elevations around here where the climate is cooler, so the shade will probably help it more than not. We notice apples growing around this area, so that's a good indicator that we receive enough chill hours during the winter to get the tree to fruit. At the very least, with the wood that it provides us, we can use it as kindling. It's a good alternative to using lighter fluid, and reduces one cost when it comes to grilling. With our apple tree planted, we'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching, and happy gardening.